Are you always the one that ends up saying it's okay and no one else ever says they're sorry? That sucks. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Saira, the show where I answer your questions about spirituality, personal growth, and mental health. And today we're talking about forgiveness again. And so the question today comes from Fariza. And Fariza says, why do I always have to be the one to forgive? Why do I always have to be the one to forgive? That's a good question. And it can be frustrating when it's always you, right? When it's always someone else does something wrong and I have to be the bigger person and say, oh, it's fine, it's fine. It sucks, right? So one of the things to consider if you're finding you're always the one who ends up forgiving, you might want to look at, because, okay, the thing with forgiveness is that the number one thing that helps us decide our kind of action steps around forgiveness is choice, remembering the choice factor. So one of the things you might want to ask yourself is, what are some of the choices that I'm making that's allowing this to be the situation where I'm always the one who forgives? Is it that if there's particular people who I'm always having to forgive? Am I putting myself in certain situations where I'm always getting hurt and there's a need for, like, what is happening here? Well, that's helpful because it'll help you to see what are you doing or not doing that may be contributing to this situation of always being the one to have to forgive, right? So it could also be that you're kind of sensitive and things really get to you. So even though something might be, meant as in jest or meant, from a loving place, you take it personally and then feel like there's something to forgive. There's something that's gone wrong and you need to forgive. So, and it's okay. It's okay if I'm an extremely sensitive person and I often interpret things that are meant to be just play seriously. And then I feel like I have to forgive the person. So it's just something to know about yourself, right? Why is it that I'm always the one? So that would be the first thing, is to ask yourself that question. The other thing about forgiveness is that forgiveness doesn't mean you are, okay, how do I say this? Often when it comes to forgiveness, we think of it as like a good guy and a bad guy, right? So I'm the good guy, always. We're always the good guy. And there's some other bad guy out there, right? Unless we're self-aware enough to know that, yeah, sometimes I'm the bad guy too, right? But generally we like to think that we're the good guy and we think that this other person has hurt me. And so when we're seeing it from that like good guy, bad guy perspective, that binary, then that's where the power struggle, that tension starts, because it's like either I win or they win, right? One of the funny things that I see people do is withhold forgiveness, right? So where the other person's actually genuinely trying to make amends, like genuinely, not the 56th time for the same thing, but really something's happened and they're genuinely sorry. And the other person will be like, And I see this with kids a lot, right? Like, I don't care if he said sorry. I'm still mad. And what I want to remind you is that there is something around the passage of time, right? So depending on what the issue is, you may need a little bit longer to be able to forgive. So if you're always just jumping to forgiveness, maybe you're not actually processing the hurt that's happening, right? And one of the things that often happens in this like personal growth world is something that we call spiritual bypass. So that's where like, oh, I want to be a forgiving person. I want to be a kind person. So it's okay. It's okay. But what happens is you don't actually then ever be honest with yourself about the pain, right? That this person did actually hurt me and it triggered me and it brought up some stuff for me. And that's where the personal growth work happens, because we become more self-aware and we become more like honest, right? And authentic. So if you're always the one forgiving, you also want to ask yourself, like, is that part of the story I have about what it means to be a good person and that I have to forgive in order to be a good person? Probably that's a part of it, right? But if I'm forgiving begrudgingly, like I don't really want to forgive, but I know I should, then it's not really forgiveness. Then it's just like, it's just, what do they call it? Like lip service, right? So asking yourself, why am I always the one who seems to be the one that's forgiving? What choices am I making that are actually creating this sort of a dynamic in my life? And then what am I really hurt about? Like, what is happening here? What is it that keeps coming up that I need to forgive? You might need to change your friend circle. If you're always being upset, becoming upset by certain people, maybe they're not the best fit for you. That's okay. That's okay. When that we can't expect other people to handle life the way we would, right? So while you or I might be willing to have a conversation, move through and move to forgiveness, somebody else might be like, yeah, whatever, like, I don't care about that. And that's just who they are, and that's their personality and their value system. So we can't change people, but we can change ourselves, and we can change how we show up. So 2 things to kind of wrap up this one about why do I always have to be the one. First is why, okay, how do I say this? If something happens over and over and over and over and over again to you, then there's some lesson that's not being understood, right? So if you have the same kinds of interactions with different people, or the same kind of interaction with the same person over and over and over, there's a stuckness that's happening. And so I would explore where might the relationship in general be stuck if you're always having to be the one to forgive. And then on the other hand, another way of looking at another component of it is maybe you're around people who are not doing their work. And that's why there's all of this forgiveness happening. And then also the third thing, and I mentioned it earlier, is maybe your sensitivity, right? Or your standards are too high and people keep letting you down because nobody could ever reach your standard anyway. So do some soul searching around that, right? So those are my thoughts about why you always have to be the one to forgive and to kind of close the loop on a conflict. Maybe, I mean, if you're asking the question, what I'm hearing is that that's not okay with you. You want to change that. And so these are some ideas of how you might change that. But keep forgiving. It's actually a great skill to be able to forgive people and to give people, like, kind of let go of that baggage from whatever the event was in the past, and be discerning about who you want to spend your time around as well. So those are my thoughts for today. Send me an email if you want a question of yours answered, and I'll see you next time. Bye.